My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a financial analyst specializing in estate planning. I've always been good with details, with numbers that tell a story, even when people try to hide the truth. That skill, it turned out, was less about spreadsheets and more about survival. The afternoon my mother told me to leave, the late summer sun was streaming through the bay window in the living room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a beautiful, peaceful day outside, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside our home. Gary, my stepfather, sat on the sofa, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. My mother, Sarah, stood by the mantelpiece, nervously twisting a silver locket that had belonged to my father. Her eyes, usually warm and expressive, were clouded with a mix of fear and forced resolve. "Eleanor," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "Gary and I have talked, and, well, it's just not working. You need to find your own place." I felt a cold dread spread through my chest, but beneath it, a tiny, defiant spark ignited. My gaze flickered from Gary's smug face to my mother's pleading eyes. I simply nodded, a silent promise forming in my mind that this wasn't over. They had just made the biggest mistake of their lives, because what they had conveniently forgotten, or perhaps never bothered to check, was that this house, this very house they were kicking me out of, was legally, unequivocally, mine. To understand why I didn't scream, why I didn't immediately reveal the truth, you need to understand the history of this house, and the man who planted the sturdy oak in the front yard, the one whose roots ran deeper than any of Gary's shallow demands. This house was built by my paternal grandfather, a carpenter with calloused hands and a heart of gold. My father, David Vance, inherited it and, with my mother, made it a home. He was a kind, steady man, an architect who saw beauty in structure and permanence. He also had a quiet foresight. When I was 10, my father was diagnosed with a rare, aggressive cancer. He fought for a year, but it took him swiftly. In the months before he passed, he meticulously planned everything, not just for my mother, but for me. He knew my mother, bless her heart, was more of a dreamer than a pragmatist. He loved her fiercely, but he also understood her vulnerability, especially when it came to finances. So, with the help of his estate lawyer, he drafted a will that was, in hindsight, a stroke of genius. The house, his most significant asset, was bequeathed to me. My mother was granted a life estate, meaning she could live in it for the rest of her life, provided she maintained it and, crucially, did not create a hostile living environment for me, the primary owner. The original deed was transferred into my name. I was a child, so the property was held in a trust until I turned 21, at which point full ownership transferred to me. My mother, devastated by grief, barely registered the details of the will, beyond knowing she could stay in the house. The lawyer explained it all, but she was in a fog. I, as a child, certainly didn't grasp the full implications until much later. The physical deed, a thick parchment document with elaborate script, was stored in a safe deposit box my father had set up for me, along with a detailed letter explaining his intentions. He wanted me to always have a home, a foundation. He wanted to protect me. Gary entered our lives 5 years ago. He was a client of my mother's, who worked part-time as an interior decorator. He was charming, attentive, and filled the void my father had left. At first, I was cautiously optimistic. My mother deserved happiness. But Gary was also smooth, a little too slick, and he had an uncanny knack for making everything about him. He moved in after 6 months, claiming his own apartment lease was up. My mother, swept up in the romance, didn't hesitate. The changes started subtly. Gary began rearranging furniture, painting walls without consulting me. He moved my father's old mahogany desk, a piece I cherished, into the garage, claiming it was too heavy and dark for the living room. My mother would just smile weakly and say, "Oh, honey, Gary has such good taste." I noticed she started referring to the house as our house, meaning hers and Gary's, not hers and mine, or even just the house. One evening, about a year after Gary moved in, I found him in the kitchen, going through my father's old recipe box. He was pulling out recipe cards, tossing them into a wastebasket. "Too much clutter," he declared, not even looking up. Your mom and I are trying to declutter. I snatched the box, my hands trembling. These are Dad's, I said, my voice tight. He merely shrugged. Old stuff. Make new memories. My mother, coming into the kitchen, saw the tension. She immediately put her arm around Gary, placating him. Eleanor, honey, Gary means well. We're just trying to make the house feel fresh. That was when the numbers stopped looking accidental. It wasn't just about redecorating, it was about erasing my father's presence, and by extension, mine. Gary's demands escalated. He started complaining about my presence, even though I worked from my home office in the spare bedroom, a quiet, self-contained space. You're always here, he'd grumble at dinner, don't you have friends? I did, but I also enjoyed being home, especially in the house my father had built for us. My mother would try to mediate, but her efforts were half-hearted. She was becoming a shadow of her former self, constantly seeking Gary's approval. Last year, Gary started pushing for me to pay more towards the household expenses. You're a professional, he stated one night, you should be contributing your fair share. Your mom and I are planning our retirement. He presented a spreadsheet he'd created, detailing my share of utilities, groceries, and even a portion of the property taxes. The amount was exorbitant, far more than a fair share. I knew, from my own work in finance, that it was inflated, designed to make me feel like a burden. I pointed out several discrepancies, calmly, logically. Gary just laughed. Always the analyst, aren't we? Can't you just trust your family? My mother, again, sided with him. Eleanor, it's just a little more. We need it. I paid, but a seed of resentment began to grow. I also began to review my own financial documents more closely, pulling out the old trust papers and the will from my safe deposit box, just to refresh my memory. What I didn't understand yet was just how far Gary would push. 2 months ago, he announced that he wanted to convert my home office into a media room. It's the perfect size for a big screen, he explained, gesturing expansively. You can set up your laptop in the attic. It's perfectly usable up there. The attic was unfinished, dusty, and sweltering in summer, freezing in winter. It was a clear attempt to marginalize me further. My mother, when I appealed to her, just wrung her hands. Gary's so excited about this, Eleanor. It would mean so much to him. I refused, firmly but politely. This is my workspace, Mom. I can't work in the attic. That refusal set the stage for the final confrontation. The argument that led to my eviction was petty, almost laughably so, but it was the culmination of years of Gary's slow, deliberate erosion of my space and my mother's complicity. I had left a few dishes in the sink after making myself breakfast. Gary found them and launched into a tirade about my lack of respect and how I was treating this house like a hotel. He called me a freeloader, a mooch, someone who takes advantage of her poor mother. My mother, instead of defending me, stood silently by, her face pale. That's enough, Gary, I said, my voice dangerously low. I contribute here. I always have. Contribute, he sneered. You barely pay your way. You're a drain on your mother's resources. Frankly, you're an adult. It's time you found your own place. My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling. He's right, Eleanor. We need our space. You need to go. That was the line. The final, undeniable betrayal. My mother, my own mother, was kicking me out of my own home, for a man who openly disrespected me and diminished her. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not the mother who had raised me, but a woman utterly consumed by another's agenda. My immediate reaction was a cold, quiet fury. I simply nodded, gathered my purse and keys, and walked out the door. The oak tree in the front yard seemed to sigh in the afternoon breeze. I drove to my friend Clara's apartment, explaining only that things had finally come to a head. Clara, a no-nonsense lawyer, listened patiently, offering comfort and a spare room. The next morning, I went to the bank, retrieved the contents of my safe deposit box, my father's will, the original deed to the house, and his letter. I reread the will, noting the specific clause about the life estate and the conditions. My father had been thorough. He had anticipated a situation like this. The clause stated that my mother's life estate was contingent on her maintaining a peaceful and non-hostile living environment for all residents, explicitly including me, the property owner. Kicking me out for Gary's comfort clearly violated that. I spent the next 2 days staying with Clara, making calls. I contacted my father's old estate lawyer, Mr. Henderson, now retired but still sharp as a tack. He confirmed everything I knew, explaining the legal standing. Eleanor, he said, your father was very clear. The house is yours. Your mother had a life estate, but it came with conditions. Kicking you out would be a clear breach. He advised me to send a formal letter, but I had a different idea. I wanted to deliver the news in person. I wanted them to see the documents, to understand the gravity of their mistake. 2 days later, I return. Ed to the house. It was a Saturday morning. I rang the doorbell. Gary opened it, looking surprised, then annoyed. What do you want, Eleanor? He asked, his voice sharp. I thought we made it clear you're not welcome here. I'm here to discuss the property, I said, holding up a manila envelope. My mother appeared behind him, her eyes wide with apprehension. There's nothing to discuss, Gary scoffed. This is our house. I stepped past him, into the living room, the same room where my mother had delivered her eviction notice. I placed the envelope on the coffee table, pulling out the documents. Actually, Gary, Mom, I said, my voice calm and steady, it's not. This house is legally mine. I laid out the will and the deed. My father left this house to me. Mom has a life estate, which means she can live here for her lifetime. However, I continued, looking directly at my mother, that life estate comes with conditions. One of them is maintaining a non-hostile environment for me, the owner. Kicking me out, at Gary's insistence, is a clear violation of that agreement. Gary's face turned beet red. That's a lie. Sarah, tell her. This is our house. My mother picked up the will, her eyes scanning the familiar script, then the deed. Her hand flew to her mouth. No, she whispered, no, David wouldn't. He did, Mom, I said, my voice softening slightly. He wanted to protect me. He wanted to make sure I always had a home. Gary snatched the papers, his eyes darting frantically over them. This is ridiculous. This is an old document. It's not valid. It's very valid, Gary, I replied, pulling out a printout from the county records website, showing the current property ownership. And I've confirmed it with Mr. Henderson, my father's estate lawyer. You can call him yourself. The color drained from my mother's face. She looked at Gary, then at me, then back at the documents. The truth, undeniable and stark, was finally sinking in. So, I continued, here are your options. Since you breached the terms of the life estate, I have the right to revoke it. That means you both need to vacate the property within 30 days. Or, if you want to stay, you can pay me fair market rent, and Gary needs to understand that I am the owner, and my presence here is not negotiable. And you, Mom, need to decide whose side you're truly on. Gary exploded, shouting about lawyers and fighting me, but his bluster was empty. My mother, however, was silent, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She finally looked at me, truly looked at me, and I saw a flicker of the mother I remembered, before Gary had consumed her. The confrontation lasted another hour, mostly Gary's futile arguments against immutable facts. He tried to claim I was trying to steal my mother's home. I simply pointed to the documents again. My mother, overwhelmed, eventually retreated to her bedroom. Gary, realizing the extent of my knowledge and the solid legal ground I stood on, eventually stormed out, slamming the front door. I stayed with Clara for another week, giving my mother space. When I returned, her car was gone. Gary's truck was gone. The house was quiet. My mother had left a note on the kitchen counter. It was brief, tear-stained. She and Gary had moved in with his sister in another town. She didn't apologize directly, but she wrote, "I'm so sorry, Eleanor. Your father was a good man. I got lost." The house felt hollow for a while, echoing with memories. I spent weeks slowly reclaiming my space, bringing my father's desk back from the garage, repainting the living room in a softer shade. I didn't hear from my mother for months. When she finally called, her voice was small, hesitant. Gary had left her. She was working odd jobs, trying to get back on her feet. We talked, tentatively, about what had happened. There were no grand apologies, no dramatic reconciliations. Just a slow, painful rebuilding of trust, one careful conversation at a time. Now, the house is truly mine. I live here, work here, and sometimes, I sit on the porch swing, looking at the sturdy oak tree my father planted. Its leaves rustle in the breeze, a quiet testament to enduring strength and deep roots. It's a home, finally, free of the shadows Gary cast, and a quiet reminder of a father's lasting love.